Good morning, everyone. My name is Gus Meyer. I'm a partner at Deloitte, responsible for overseeing the Midlands Health Tech Catalyst. The Catalyst was set up to support the advancement of healthcare technology, to disrupt current health delivery models and improve patient lives. It's my pleasure to be hosting this panel and discussion, and also a presentation that looks at disruptive healthcare technologies. I'm joined by an illustrious panel comprising of three disruptive entrepreneurs in the form of Dr. Sam Rogers, Chief Medical Officer from Medicheck, Dr. Krishan Ramdu, CEO and founder of Timber Health Technologies Limited, and Dr. Stephanie Campbell, founder of Oka Health. And finally, last but not least, we have Karen Taylor, the head of Deloitte's Centre for Health Solutions, Deloitte's Global Healthcare Research Centre. We're going to kick off with a short presentation from Karen about her research into digital transformation and healthcare disruption. So Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Gus, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of our research, which took place last year between April and July last year. Our report was published in September 2020. So the research took place during the first wave of the pandemic, and that's important because one of the things I cover is the fact that the pandemic did lead to a real acceleration, as probably all of you know, in the adoption of technologies and open the way for a lot of ideas and disruptive technologies. It focused on 7 countries. You can see them here: Denmark, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the UK. We surveyed, importantly, 1,781 frontline doctors and nurses across these countries. And that's important because we were asking them about their experience in using technologies, how they were supported, how comfortable they felt, and what were the barriers. Semi-structured interviews with over 40 leaders across these countries, and also internally looking at our own teams who work with clients across all these countries. All of our report features good practice case studies, which I haven't got time to go into, but many of them are what you would term disruptive. And why is this important? When we talk about digital transformation, we are not talking about the technology. We're talking about a change management process to change ways of working and to support patients in different ways. There are benefits for patients, as you would expect from this, and that's really important to be able to demonstrate. It empowers patients to monitor their own health, it increases access to more timely and convenient care, it improves medication management, enhances the patient experience, enables more predictive, preventative, personalised and participatory care. All of these things are ambitions for every healthcare system. So being able to use technology to realise these benefits is important. There are benefits for clinicians in helping them to work at the top of their licence, supporting them to work more efficiently and effectively, and also to improve their job satisfaction. It also helps to look after their own health and well-being using technology. So the benefits overall for the healthcare system are also very important, but it also enables this integration approach that is, again, a model for many countries. But when we asked what top 3 words came to mind when clinicians were asked to think about the progress of digital transformation in their country, the most mentioned word was slow, bureaucratic, complex. There were some positives: fast, innovative, efficient. And we had done this survey previously just in the UK 12 months earlier, and we had very few positives in that response. So we did see an improvement in that 12 months between 2019 and 2020. We also asked what were the top 3 challenges facing healthcare organisations in implementing digital technologies. Bureaucracy in healthcare, cost of the technology, and finding the right technologies were the top 3 mentioned challenges. In Italy, they also highlighted training of staff to use the technology, and in the Netherlands and Portugal, and also in Portugal, training staff, and in the Netherlands, the challenges to sharing data. All of these challenges are things that any disruptor needs to think about when they're trying to sell their technologies into healthcare systems. Also, when we asked what technologies were being used to support care delivery, unsurprisingly, healthcare records was the number 1 technology and was quite well distributed across the different countries, although there were some differences. E-prescribing was next. Some places like Germany have very low, and there was a legal constraint to e-prescribing. You have to have physical paper prescriptions. You had to. They changed that during the pandemic. And then as you move down to the next generation technologies, the more disruptive technologies, if we're honest, the voice recognition tools, robotics, genomics, radio frequency identification tags, AI-enabled technologies, they were much, much less common and much less used, showing that this is a space that really is ripe for innovation. And what can you do about it? The 5 key steps that we identified to enable providers to close the digital gap, which is essential for the development of a smart health ecosystem, are under two overarching themes: changing the mindset so that the actual cultures of these organizations become much more digitally focused, and liberating the data. The importance of having access to the data created through digital technologies can't be overstated. But for that to happen, you need to have interoperability, open electronic health records, and an enabling infrastructure. And often that infrastructure is overlooked when people are thinking about the investment. But the infrastructure is absolutely critical, and it includes connectivity. Of course, for that, changing the mindset, having digital first leaders with a mindset of digital first, and of course governance, security, cybersecurity, security, patient data security. All of these things are really important, and being very clear who is accountable for these issues. And then the smart characteristics that can help improve technology adoption at scale. And this is something that many companies come to me and ask, why can't I get more scaled up adoption of my technologies? So we've created this SMART acronym. They need to be straightforward and easy to use. They need to have a measurable impact. And I can't stress that enough. Being able to demonstrate to healthcare systems how your technologies will improve adoption. And what benefits are to patients and clinicians and end users. Agile, we know that technology moves at a fast pace. If the technologies that people are investing in aren't automatically updated and kept current, then people will be concerned about investing in them. So you need to be demonstrating how they will be kept up to date. Reliant on industry collaboration and tailored to end users' needs. Again, if a technology solution hasn't been developed with input from clinicians and patients, then it is much less likely to be adopted. And finally, when we talk about patients, we know that there is challenges to digital inclusion, and that if we're not careful, then adopting technologies will increase health inequalities. So we've got to tackle digital inclusion. We've got to skill our citizens in being digitally literate, but also health literate. And that means ensuring that they have access to the technologies, but also connectivity. There are approaches there are in the UK that we are using social prescribing to ensure that people who are disadvantaged can have access to some of these technologies. But it is something to bear in mind, including skilling up citizens in the use of technologies. People do have different levels of digital maturity, just like the systems themselves. There's more in-country variation in digital maturity than there is between countries. So skilling up all organisations and individuals with digital maturity is important. But people are willing to share their data. There's a lot of myths around data sharing. People are willing, but they want to be clear who they're going to share it with. A large percentage of people think that they should own their own data and determine that. But in some countries, they're more confident in their doctors or health systems being responsible for who they share the data with. And increased use of virtual care visits, and people who've had one would want another one. So that's something to bear in mind. The future of health will be driven by digital transformation, enabled by free-flowing, interoperable data and open platforms. And disruption is inevitable. It's what happens next depends on how organizations respond. The incumbents, the traditional players, they can innovate themselves to become market leaders, or they can ignore what's happening in terms of disruption and technology innovation, and the disruptors will come in and dislodge them from some of the provision that they're involved in. So the incumbents' decisions will determine whether the disruptors will be willing to partner with them, and partnership is a really popular way to go, or compete and disrupt the existing business models. I think we'll see both of these things happening, but then it is up to the disruptors to really convince the system that they are better for patients, better for clinicians. I'll leave it there and hand it back.
Thank you very much, Karen. Now, I have a number of sort of questions there, Karen, but I'll come back briefly to that. I'd love to just introduce these sort of panel members, if I may. And in particular, if I can ask the panel members, tell us a little bit about your business, and in particular, why you believe you're disruptive. And let's start off. Stephanie, I'd love to hear from you about your business and why you're disruptive.
Thank you very much, Gus. Yes, so my name is Stephanie Campbell. I'm the founder of Occo Health, and we develop a smartphone vision monitoring, so remote vision diagnostics on the smartphone, no hardware required, and people simply interact with a very, very simple video game, and from that we gather data about how they see the world. So what that means is that we can do that regularly, so that we can see how somebody's vision is changing over time. Now that's pretty disruptive, because as an eye professional myself, so I'm an optometrist by background and vision scientist by training, and it's very unusual for us to be using something like a video game to monitor people's vision. And part of that is for engagement, but part of that is also to get much better data than what we would usually get from an eye chart, so that we can be predictive about how people's vision will change. And that's really disruptive, because what we currently do in eye care is we wait for somebody's vision to deteriorate and then we react to that. Whereas what we're talking about at Occo is proactive eye health, which, as you can imagine, is going to be a real game changer for ophthalmology.
Thank you, Stephanie. Krisha, tell us a bit about your business and why you're disruptive.
So thanks very much, Gus and Karen. So yeah, eyes and ears go very well together. So I'm Dr. Ramsey. I'm the founder and CEO here at Health. I'm an ENT surgeon by background, and also done my PhD in hearing health. So I know a little bit about the space. And I would always say that perhaps eyes have been 10 years ahead of ears, but what we've tried to do at Timber Health is try and bridge that gap. And we've developed a solution which takes the whole ear and hearing health pathway out into the community. When it's traditionally delivered in the hospital setting, we've developed a tool which is a hardware and software solution, which allows allied health professionals to do the first part of the journey, to look in the ear, remove wax, take a hearing screening program, and then bring all of that into a digital record that then can be shared with any specialist in any location. And I think what we've tried to do and what we've been disruptive is similar to Karen's thought, is that we were looking at a system which had been doing things exactly the same way for multiple years. And by using our workforce, we managed to win the hearts and minds of our clinicians as well as the patients. And we've managed to get a fair amount of scale by doing so.
Fabulous, thank you. And Sam, you're described as a startup, but tell us a little bit about it, because I understand you've been going a little bit longer than a startup. But tell us a little bit about your business and why you're disruptive.
So we're a little bit, you're right, we're a little bit long in the tooth to be described as a startup, but we've been around for 20 years providing direct consumer diagnostics, predominantly blood tests, but really it's been any pathological test that's suitable for sending by post to a laboratory. It's standard laboratory technology, so we're talking about vacutainers and microtainers that are in use in our hospitals every day. We've done the work to make sure that those samples are stable and reliable in transit, and our laboratory do further work to make sure that the results can be relied upon for accuracy. For instance, with capillary testing, that offers a comparable result to venous testing. Why are we disruptive? From a personal perspective, when I joined the company 6 years ago, the agency I was working through said, do you want to do some reporting for online blood testing? And I said, what's that? I didn't know it existed. So for clinicians, it's disruptive because they're used to sending people to a phlebotomy department. For the people using the service, it's disruptive because they're used to having to take at least half a day off work to go and sit in a waiting room full of coughing, sneezing people to have their blood test. And lastly, we're disruptive because actually we give people direct access to their results with insights from a doctor about what they need to be doing to correct any health issues that have been identified or to optimize their health. Those are the two main branches we do. Lastly, we're disruptive because we're now opening up our service to large clients with a sort of modular system that will let them pick and choose the bits they want, from ordering a kit through to our doctors providing interpretation. So that's MediChecks in a nutshell.
That's fantastic. Thank you to all our entrepreneurs for giving us the insight into the sort of disruption that they created. Karen, I was quite interested in your report where you sort of highlighted the sort of uptake of EPR sort of systems, In particular, there was a lack of take-up of things like remote monitoring, AI, voice recognition, robotics, and yet our disruptors are in that sort of zone there. Is there a reason why? And in particular, I'd love to sort of understand from our sort of entrepreneurs, do you think this area is going to be disrupted in the future? So Karen.
So I think the reason is just timing. I think the focus has been, digital transformation of healthcare has been relatively slow compared to other industries. And we've seen it happen much more quickly over the last few years. And so getting those basics in place, if you can't link in, if a disruptive technology can't link into a workflow, and that workflow isn't linked into an electronic health record, then it doesn't disrupt in the way it's intended. It's got to be able to be part of a clinical workflow and clinical pathway. And I think what we've heard here is exactly that's what they do. So I think those things needed to be in place. And there's also the investment. So a lot of the funding is going to these. And so when it comes to other disruptive technologies, it's who's going to pay and what are the benefits. And I think that's where there's been a lag in understanding the incentive, aligning the incentives to fund things that will actually deliver improved benefits, not just better outcomes, but also be more cost effective. So I think there's just been a lag. And I think there is a bit of it's about all the education, being scared of what, everyone talks about AI, just how true is the AI enablement of a technology? Because I think a lot of it is not as accurately portrayed as it should be. And so it's educating the clinicians about why it's important. I think we're seeing changes. We've definitely got good case examples in our report, and we've heard some today. So, but I don't think it's anything to be alarmed at, but it does show where the opportunities are.
Okay. I'd just love to hear from our panel members, the entrepreneurs. Do we think these are the sort of new areas that people are going to be disrupting? And from your point of view, what sort of learning lessons do you think we should sort of take away to accelerate the adoption of technology in these areas? Sam, I'll give you the hard question first.
Genomics is a really interesting one to me because it would be an excellent complement to the blood tests that we provide. But the bit we trip up over is how do we get the genomics data to sit comfortably alongside the blood data, first of all. And just getting the data structure correct is quite challenging there. How do you join up the insights across the two of them? How do you maintain the evidence base that guides those insights? And the genetics, that was exciting when I was in medical school, which is further ago than I care to remember. But it's remained consistently complicated over that time. And I think the best uses I've seen is where disruptive companies are giving you data that is easily importable, shareable, interoperable with your system, and giving you the insights with it as well. And I think we are at a point now where genomics will potentially go mainstream.
Okay, lovely. And Stephanie, from you?
Yeah, I think Karen touched on, the how widespread electronic patient records are becoming, and for us, we're really excited by this in ophthalmology because that means that we can take the data that external devices like OCO are creating, push that in to the patient's main source of health data within the hospitals, for example, or within the GP practice, and take that data, align it with the other information about the person's general well-being, and then use that data to make information and insights and ultimately the wisdom that will help clinicians to make more informed decisions. So for me, the bit I'm most excited about is the alignment of these data streams, the interoperability, which a lot of us in digital health are really focused on. So the future is definitely bright, and ultimately this is a bit that we need to concentrate on, the alignment of these different streams of data so that we can get to the point where we can make insightful, predictions and ultimately the personalization of health.
And Christian, from you, your views?
Yeah, so I think that there's a mix of everything actually, but for me, where I see one of the biggest disruptions and the opportunity, and we talk about timing being one of the key moments of probably all of us that have had a point to disrupt. And I think for me, it's about the pathway, both the clinical and the patient pathway. And we've just gone through 18 months where healthcare has almost been flipped on its head as to how patients actually access care. And it's a real moment in time to say, well, how can we make it much more accessible for patients, which ultimately makes the clinician journey a lot easier. And all of us have got solutions which will enable that to happen. And I think we're at a moment in time where we can start to deliver and talk to people about new pathways, because actually now the moment is, well, actually, let's try and do it, because people are ready for it. I think if we had done that pre-pandemic, people wouldn't have been ready and said, well, actually, the system is so stretched at the moment, we haven't got the ability to. And for us, I think that has certainly helped, because I'm actually able to go with them and say, well, here's a solution. If you are looking at ear and hearing health, this is a solution. And yes, look, we can help with your patient backlog, your elective recovery, and it ticks a lot of boxes that the system is trying to solve for. And I think that's why I think in the short term, that's where a lot of disruption will happen.
Yeah, I think, Christian, you're right. The timing is, critical at the moment. I think there's been some great technologies, but I think the timings are upon us at the moment. I mean, Karen's report sort of mentioned that actually disruptive technology is going to have some great benefits, but I'd love to learn from yourselves. We hear about all these barriers. Give some examples of one or two barriers that you've all had. And Sam, you got some great ones because you've been at it for 10 years or so at it. So you must have faced a few of those. But, how did you overcome those? Because I'd love for our disruptor sort of community to understand the sort of energy and passion that you've had to have to overcome those. So let's start off with Stephanie. Let's start off with yourself.
One of the big barriers, of course, with digital health is reimbursement. And making sure that within the digital healthcare system there is a way for startups to get that reimbursement that they deserve for their products, because of course everything, if we're thinking about NHS centric, traditionally the NHS have bought hardware for individual departments, particularly in eye care. So designing, is there a medical software as a service, where they just pay for the number of patients who use it, looking at those and creating those pathways in a way that works for our hospitals. So in order to demonstrate the cost effectiveness, which Karen touched on, is crucially important, because why should health services pay for something unless it's actually useful, and balance that against the startup's need to get that cash in. What we've been finding a real challenge, and ultimately one which we've managed to overcome, is the design of a clinical study or a clinical trial that allows for the safety to be tested, which the regulators want, the clinical efficacy to be tested, which is what the doctors want, but also the commercial and the health economics. And so having the clinical trials that are built to test all of these things together is certainly a challenge, but one which I think, really we're starting to begin to see happen, because it's so tempting when, you're working with academic clinicians to really focus on just the efficacy of the product, but actually that is not enough to get it to market.
Christian, from your side?
Yeah, I think to follow on, I think if I was to pick two potential barriers, was one, finding some of that evidence base to say, look, it actually does do what it says on the tin. And I think and then equally then getting the clinicians, I think, was the first people to buy in. And I think there was some benefit of being within that fraternity already, but I think for other startups that might not be the case. But I think if I took it in twofold, I think the first thing I did was talk to my ENT colleague and say, look, this is what I'm trying to do. Initially they were like, oh no, we've always done it this way, what are you trying to do? And I think once I was able to win them over of saying, look, it is possible and it makes your life easier, then I think having some of that support was very helpful. The second thing, and particularly in the NHS, is always challenging, is similar to what Stephanie said, is getting that evidence base. And so at Timper, what we managed to do was almost do it back to front. We were able to get some real good case studies in the private sector who just saw there was some real benefit in using this kit, making the whole system much more efficient. Once I had that as a baseline set of evidence, you can then take it to the public sector, say, hey, look, it's working here. Why are we not getting adoption in the NHS? And I think then when you marry that with evidence base plus some buy-in from the clinical community, ultimately those two things together will still make a better journey for the patient. And I think then you've got the three parts of it, which then hopefully help with adoption. But yes, it's certainly not easy, but I think it's building that foundation.
Fabulous. And Sam, from your perspective?
So we've touched the trust ones beautifully, and the we've always done it that way line, Christian, really resonates with me. I've heard that countless times throughout my career as a blocker. So yeah, having the data, operating off an evidence base that is sound, having also the research that demonstrates that your technology is as accurate as the incumbent technology and as reliable is all vital. From a user perspective, so we're direct consumer. What have we done to make people aware we're there? Well, first of all, we simply put our hand up in various places and say, hi, we're here, and did you know you can test your own blood? But the other thing we do is that we try and make it as seamless as possible for the person who's using it. I think that's the point where people are disengaged. If they found your service and they find it difficult to use, they're not going to continue to use it, or they're going to use it in a way that doesn't work. And for us, one of the best interventions we had with our customers was introducing a card that said, "I wish I read the instructions." And we found that the way they used our kits and the way they engaged with it skyrocketed after that. So besides the trust, I would say just make sure your service is efficient and delights the end user.
Okay, Sam, I just want to stay with that actually, the sort of patient journey, because we've talked about EPR systems, we've talked about clinicians, but actually we've not really talked about the patient. How do you take the patient along with you on this new journey, because they're not used to this?
Sorry, Gus, I'm
so
not sure.
How do you take the patients along with you on this journey? Because we've talked about taking clinicians, we've talked about evidence, we've talked about EPR systems, but surely it must be about the patient.
It is.
So I was going to say, Christian, I'd love to sort of get your experience first, and then I was going to ask Sam, and then maybe Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the patient's journey is almost the most impactful. So you've got to do the bits before to kind of get your product ready and make it efficient. But really, for it to scale is, it's kind of saying it very simplistically, but I think what we did very well to start with was really spend some time with the patients and then evolve the product on the back of some of the foundation work that we did, but evolve it to say, well, actually now these patients want to be seen in this environment. They want to have one tool that looks in the ear, does everything, and then have the ability to only see a specialist if they need to. And I think the way that we won over the patients was spending those initial few months really following their journey and watching how they interacted with the kit, how they interacted with the software that was, showing them some information. Not that they had to do anything, because ours, unlike Sam's, is actually the clinician uses the kit. But one of the big bits of feedback, so our kit is rolled out in Boots, for example. One of the things which really tipped it for them was when the elderly population that they're saying they felt they were now engaged with technology, and seeing their picture of their ear on the screen, they said, "Wow, we feel like we're taking ownership of our healthcare." And I think that was a big trigger for them to say, well, if they're feeling engaged, that's great. And I think that was one of the things which won over the minds of certainly the patients.
Fabulous. And Sam?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question, Gus?
Yeah, how do you take? We've talked about the sort of evidence base. We've talked about working with clinicians. Actually, how do you take the patient along on that journey? Because you've got to really transform their minds and hearts to really adopt the new technology.
And the first one, it's advice that doctors can follow in consultations, or that health tech providers can follow, and that is talk to people. And it is simple things, taking people along on the journey with you, keeping them updated about what's happening from our perspective when they've sent a sample, when it's been received by the lab, when the report's coming through, making sure that we're using language that's easy to engage with in all of the materials they receive. That's key. And the other point, which Christian touched on, which I think is absolutely vital, is use a test. Don't use a test when you've got a finished product, which I've seen doctors and software designers do. They design it, they think they've got it all solved. They go out to the customers, and then, they don't like it very much, or it doesn't do what they want to do. So look it up with Post-it notes, and just get feedback as soon as you can, and have as few mouse clicks as possible, as low friction as possible, and people will use it. and offer actionable insights. That's my last.
Brilliant. No, brilliant. And Stephanie, I mean, you've come up with a lovely way of getting people to participate.
Yeah, for us, patient centricity is everything, because we get the best data when the patient's really engaged with what we do. So we have co-design principles right from the get-go. We work with UK's leading macular disease charity to the point where, I think we've got our technology to the point where it doesn't actually feel like you're having your eyes tested, because it's not about what we've always done, the way that we've always done it in clinics. And eye specialists, quite traditional. And there's certain ways of doing things. We all know the eye chart hasn't changed in 150 years. So shaking that up had to have a real benefit. And, we are compared to our competitors, we have reimagined that experience, and we haven't just copied the eye chart. And we, every single step of the way, have really looked and said, well, what does great engagement feel like, and how can we make this patient-centric rather than traditional-centric or clinician-centric? And as it happened then, because the data that's coming back from the patients is so good because their engagement is so high, the clinicians are like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. And that's what we found the biggest thing was: start with the patients, then worry about the clinicians, which is really counterintuitive. But that, I think, is what we do, because this is technology ultimately that's going into people's homes. So it doesn't really matter what the clinicians think of the setup, if that setup is private to the patient. The clinicians really care about the data that's coming out and the usefulness. So that, for me, that's the biggest thing.
That's fabulous insights. Thank you very much. I just want to stay with the patient, though. One of the things that Karen's reports has highlighted is about digital inequalities, because of either skills, access, connectivity. How do we, create an inclusive digital healthcare society? Karen, I'd love some insights from yourself, but just an open sort of discussion about that. Is there a great deal of inequality? There are concerns about the elderly. I love your views, Karen.
So there are concerns about inequality, and the pandemic has shown just what can happen when you have an unequal society, and we've seen that played out daily on our news streams. So, but there are initiatives. There has been a widening digital participation initiative across the UK for a number of years, with going into libraries and other places where people meet to actually coach them, train them in using digital technologies. There are lots of different approaches and some very innovative ways, and that's why I say the technology developers themselves also have a role to play in educating the public and upskilling them. But it's not just for healthcare. The digital inclusion also affects most engagement with public services, because a lot of public services are going online. So it doesn't just have to be the NHS who is trying to improve people's digital inclusion and digital literacy. It's a general approach that can be done throughout. But if you want your technologies, and if you can convince clinicians as well as the patients that you will make sure that they are comfortable and the technology is easy to use, then you're doing both. You're fulfilling both roles. So I do think it's important. On the elderly part, I think we've heard how older people are engaging with all of these three different approaches. I believe, given the right support, and that doesn't mean necessarily face-to-face, but elderly people have been able to engage with their phones, with their iPads. They've been able to Zoom everybody that they love during this pandemic, and they're comfortable with technology once they get used to it, just the same way you and I are. And I'm probably moving more towards that elderly person anyway, but I don't think age is the barrier. I think it's more mindsets that's the barrier.
That was Christian.
Well, yeah, I think, if we're talking about disruption, I think disruptive technology which deals with the inequality are ones which are probably going to be sustainable, because, as Karen said, it's not just in healthcare, it's everywhere. And I think all of us here on this panel, we probably set out on that journey where we really are trying to support the inequalities and, democratize the care that we're delivering in each of our different aspects. I mean, even at Timper, what we really want to do is not just do it right here in the developed world, but take that kit that's across my shoulder into the developing world and deliver them a service which they never would have had access to but still have access to, first world clinicians. And I think disruptive technology, I would hope, the way the future is going, will address that as well as one of their other pillars of as they are starting their journey.
And I love that plug, Christian. That was great. So, Sam, what was your views?
Yeah, so I have to say I agree wholeheartedly with Karen. Age is not a barrier. If you ask my kids who the biggest users of Facebook are, they will say the elderly. And we have a generation who are comfortable with technology by and large. For those people who aren't engaging technology, we need to ask ourselves what the barrier is. For some, that's going to be cognitive or physical impairments that make it difficult to use a device. For some, there's economic barriers to using it, either buying the equipment or paying for the contracts that come with it. And then you've got the people who are actively disengaging from digital technology as well. For some of those, you can put workarounds in place through great user design. For some, you do need parallel services, which are face-to-face based. And my work as a GP, over the lockdown, we were largely offering digital consultations. I had a whole cohort of people who were delighted about that. They've been clamoring for digital consultations for decades. And then I had a large group who also weren't happy. And I think the important thing is that we offer choice in how we provide access to healthcare. So, digital technology will not always be the solution for absolutely everyone, but for the people who are comfortable with digital approaches, we should have it there.
All right, Sam. And Stephanie?
Oh, I totally agree with all of the above. We have patients, I think we tried as old as 92 using our technology and as young as 2 years old. And yes, I think having that as an option can make healthcare more accessible to certain groups. And but I agree with Sam, for some people, I think this is the thing about digital, we need to know when a face-to-face is appropriate. Yeah. And I think if we're clever about it, we can use disruptive digital technologies to help us pinpoint when is an in-person appointment, even for those people who do use digital, when is an in-person appointment going to be most effective?
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. I'm running out of time. I've got loads of questions to ask you. There's so much there. But look, the NHS faces, a massive sort of crisis. If you look at the pandemic, the sort of massive waiting list, the shortage in clinical clinicians and workforce, and yet Karen's research, one of the big words was adoption of technology is slow. Give me one piece of advice that I could take to policymakers and say, look, this will help you adopt technology a lot faster. Just one. So I'll start off with Stephanie. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that what we have to do is look at and ask what the need is. So in our case, it's finding the right patient to be in the eye clinic at the right time. It's not about copying the eye chart like for like, but it's saying, how do we get the data we need, even if that is in a different way? So I'd say to policymakers, don't expect something that's exactly the same, but happening remotely. Let's look and say, what data do we need and what innovative ways can we get that data?
Fabulous. Sam?
I would tell them to look at the clinical pathway that's highest volume with the biggest pain point, and then go out, talk to people in technology and ask them how they could solve it, and be open-minded when they hear the answers and try it. Take a leap.
Christian?
I think the ability for young disruptive companies to pilot, because I think once we pilot, we can show that evidence base, which then will allow scale. Obviously done with the right setup, but piloting, I think, would be really helpful for young companies.
Brilliant. And then Karen?
I think that my answer is you haven't got a choice. The cost of healthcare is increasing and the supply of a workforce is challenging. So the only solution is to find new ways of doing things, and technology-enabled ways of doing them is cost-effective.
Brilliant, Karen. Thank you very much. I love that. You've got no choice. So look, I'm just conscious of time, but I'd love you to all think, you've got a crystal ball. What does the next 3 to 5 years look like in your sort of world of sort of modern healthcare? So let's start off. Christian, what does that look like for you?
For me, personally, I think it's more care in the community. the linking up and joining the dots between primary and secondary care and making that as streamlined, as efficient as possible.
Okay, Stephanie?
For me, the eye care that we're going to see over the coming years is going to be personalized, and it's going to be predictive, and much, much more about the individual and their own risk factors rather than that of the population.
Lovely, thank you. And Sam?
For me, I think it'll be clinicians and health policy makers learning to trust people to provide their own self-care. And to enable that, they'll be providing healthcare, they'll be providing consultations, diagnostics across the high street, digital platforms, the place that it's most convenient for people to engage with it.
Fabulous. And Karen?
I'm going to add 2 P's to what we heard from Stephanie and say not only is it going to be personalised and predictive, it's going to be preventative and participatory. So the 4 P's of healthcare. But importantly, I'm going to plug my predictions report, because the report I published at the end of last year, Future en Masse, has 10 predictions, and it covers all of the points that have just been made and a few more.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Karen. Look, I've had an absolute wonderful time sort of hosting this event. I think the healthcare in the future is going to be disruptive. And it's individuals like yourselves who are really going to make the changes. And actually, you know, we are crying out for this change. There is a sort of a view that actually we aren't going to disenfranchise the elderly. We aren't going to disenfranchise individuals. Actually, technology could open up healthcare to a lot of people who need it. And I think if you look at the pandemic itself, actually it's creating a bigger inequality. And, you know, and it's fabulous to meet yourselves, because I think you will actually address some of those inequalities that I think we are crying out for. And it's brilliant that, you know, you're doing it in the UK PLC, which is fabulous. We're crying out for brilliant technologies like yourselves. So there's a couple of takeaways from me here today. Is firstly, you know, yes, the new technologies like AI, robotics, remote monitoring are going to be hugely disruptive. They are going to change the face of healthcare delivery. And I do think it's going to be very personalized. You know, we are going to have the Amazon of healthcare going forward. Better care delivered more promptly to the individual and actually catering for the individual's needs. So that's fabulous. I suppose the big takeaway here from Karen's report is that if you look at the digital healthcare market, it's worth £25 billion. And that's increased substantially over the last 2 or 3 years. But looking out over the next 5 years, it's going to be worth approximately £40 billion. So nearly doubling up. And I'm pleased to say a lot of the disruptors on this webinar will be part of that growth, which is phenomenal. So without further ado, I wish all the disruptors on this conference the best of luck. And I thank you for joining us today. Have a safe journey to your next session. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all the panel members for joining us today. Thank you very much indeed.